Please note, this episode discusses mature themes, including violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. Farrah Fazal is an Emmy and Award-winning investigative journalist and producer with a distinguished career in national and international television news. A seasoned field producer and director, she has worked on high-profile true crime projects and other unscripted genres. Farrah's unique talent for conducting sensitive interviews allows her to connect deeply with her subjects, bringing complex stories to life with empathy and integrity. Her work includes reporting from combat zones and even covering the U.S.-Mexico border amidst drug cartel violence. Most recently, she traveled to Israel and Palestine, not only as a storyteller, but for her own personal journey. Throughout her career, Farrah has earned a reputation for impactful journalism that elevates underrepresented voices, making her a leading figure in true crime and investigative reporting. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Farrah's personal tale. Okay, everyone. This is an interview I have been waiting to do because I am sitting down with one of my dear friends, Farrah. And Farrah is someone who captures a story and then some. So, Farrah, first of all, thank you for coming on.
Oh, happy to be here.
Yes. So, first and foremost, I want people to get to know you a little bit and get to know your background. So, can you share where did you grow up and what inspired you to pursue storytelling?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. So I was born in Africa, in Tanzania.
Mm.
When I was about 7, my parents sent me to London to Catholic boarding school. So I went to most of my younger years, like, that we would consider elementary school, kind of almost middle school. I spent in London, England.
Wow.
Um, my father was a political prisoner for a few years in Tanzania. So I come from uh, two people who are really very, I would suggest, social justice minded and really deep and centered in their love of community and love of being able to have charity and give. And that's how my father ended up as a political prisoner. He was trying to help his religious institution, his mosque, because there was a lot of people who were really suffering, starving, and he decided in his little space, he had a tiny little shop, and he was able to order some food and give it to this community, and that's when the feds sort of come in, and in many of countries in Africa, there was a dictatorial system, authoritarianism, and in many still is. So he was in the wave of people who tried to do good and essentially ended up in prison because he wanted to just help. So I only mention that because I come from these two humans who see this world in this way. My parents eventually decided that I should go to Canada, and I did all my high school and my post-secondary in Canada. And I realized I come from a journalistic background. And when I was 7 years old, sitting on my uncle's couch in London, I didn't know it was called journalism then, but I knew it was called a story. And I just wanted to tell a story. And it's rather tragic, the story that I saw that eventually gave a sort of birth to this thing that I called journalism and that I came to know as journalism. I was sitting on my uncle's couch it was a Saturday, and I had gone to see him, and we were having chai and watching the BBC, because what do you do when you're 7 years old at your
Right.
uncle's house? You sit on the couch and watch the BBC and have chai. And I saw a reporter who was interviewing this boy who was 7 years old.
Mm.
And he was telling the reporter, this little boy, that it was a war zone somewhere, and he was the only survivor. He had lost all of his family members. And he said to the reporter, "I'm all alone in the world."
Mm.
and I don't know where to go. I have no parents. I have nowhere to go. And that I had parents. I had people who cared about me and loved me, and I was just incredibly compelled that I needed to tell his story to everybody. And I said to my uncle, you need to go everywhere and you need to go to work on Monday and you need to tell everybody. And I am going to go to school and I'm going to tell the nuns and all the people, all the kids that I know. And that to me became the genius of storytelling. And I knew that I wanted to do that since I was 7. So nothing really
Wow.
distracted me from that. I mean, I'm the prodigy of 2 people who always really care that I am able to make my way in the world. So yes, as an immigrant, my parents said to me, "Are you sure you don't want to be a doctor? Are you sure you don't want to be a lawyer?" I mean, but genuinely, they accepted this. Well, they didn't even know what the hell this was that I was
Yeah.
doing, but they were all
Wow.
in and all you know, supportive of whatever it is that this thing was. And to me, it was storytelling. It was listening and telling a story that touched me deeply. And I think that that sort of, I guess, in my work in the years to come would define me. That I feel really convicted about the stories I tell. I care about being in footstep with the people who tell me their story because it's the currency of trust that we build.
Yes.
When somebody tells you their story, it is in my years as an investigative reporter, a war correspondent, an international journalist. I've worked at in local TV. I've worked in national TV as a national correspondent for CBS News. And I've worked internationally as a war correspondent covering several different wars, and the last one was in Syria before I moved to LA. And I have always understood that this thing that we call people's story is the most priceless, one of the most priceless possessions they have. And people in war zones have told me, like, I have no food, I have no water, I have no shelter, I have nothing. I just have this story and that's all I have to tell you. And it for me was um, uh, it is a gift to be able to receive it and also to be able to be a good caretaker of it. So I understood the idea of what story meant, what it meant to people who gave it to me, and what it meant to me to hear it and to um, accept that trust as a covenant that we would walk through this story that they own together.
Wow.
And I think that that is incredibly important that we do that for the people who tell us their stories.
My goodness, Farrah. That is beautiful. I should preface this because I didn't at the top, but we have worked together on a couple series now, and listeners, when I say Farrah is the real deal, I mean it. I have never seen someone just connect with people and do so in a way that humanizes them, but also allows that trust. And just as you're saying, I mean, these stories that we have heard together are equally just so gut-wrenching. So hearing just your philosophy on storytelling, but also just how that all came to be, it's just so remarkable and so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and being very vulnerable about that too. So I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
I think we cannot ask people to do something we are not willing to do. We
Yes.
cannot ask people to be vulnerable if we're not willing.
Yeah.
As producers, as reporters, as journalists, as people, as creatives in the process, we cannot ask people to give us what we're not willing to give them. And I think people feel this from us. They
Yeah.
feel our interest, they feel our passion, they feel our dispassion when we just want something from them. We just want to say
Yeah.
this way so that we can
Uh-huh.
have a soundbite.
Yeah.
They feel that too, and I think they decide.
Yeah.
How much they're willing to, the more that people are willing to trust us and tell us their story, the more that we are able to help other people. I mean, ultimately, this is most people in my experience will tell us their story, will go to these deepest, darkest, painful places
Hmm.
because they see their story as a light in the world. That
Yes.
if I tell this to you, you will be able to help other people, so other people don't have to go through this depth of darkness that I've been in. And maybe my story will make a little bit of a difference. And I think it requires us to be good caretakers of that. It
Mm.
requires us to also walk in footstep, be vulnerable, be authentic. And I always have thought over the years, viewers in all the TV places that I've been, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, they can smell us a mile away.
Yes, they can.
If you're
Hmm.
not if you're not genuine and you're not authentic and you're not really there for the reason that storytelling allows us this privilege to be, and it is a privilege, they can smell you a mile away, and they are really conditioned to giving you, if they decide to talk to you, to give you the very basic. The
Yep.
whole point of storytelling is so that we can uncover these layers like an onion, so that we can get to a place where it touches people. The most powerful storytelling is when we can touch people, when people feel compelled by hearing that story, by understanding that, and feel like their window has been opened, or that they have been seen, or that they've been heard, and we each other have the capacity to change each other. So, people who we ask to tell us their story have that capacity and that power, and it's just our job not to get in their way of doing that and allow them the space to do that.
That's beautiful. 100% to all of that. You say it so eloquently, and that is all correct. I would love to know, Farrah, how did you get your start in the industry and then transitioning into investigative journalism?
Well, it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
This is the story of every journalist, every creative. It's never that easy.
Yes.
And I think the road always, when you walk out on the road becomes clear. So when I was 16, I guess I'll tell the story because it's a little bit funny. But when I was 16, I thought I need to get a job in my business because this is what I do. I want to do this. And I was a high school kid, and I was a high school kid in a very less diverse place.
Mm.
And I realized that there were like kids who looked like me, and also maybe kids who kind of maybe needed to learn about kids like me. And so I knew that public access was a place where you could go and do shows. So I had watched public access, and I put together this little proposal about how we need to tell like the stories of kids who were brown girls like me, and black boys, and all the diversity in.
Hmm.
So I went to the public access with my little proposal, and I said, I'm here to talk to you about my proposal. And they said, who are you? I said, well, my name is Sarah. I told them who I was. I was a kid, and that I didn't say I was a kid. I said, I am somebody who wants to do a show on your public access. And they said, yeah, like yeah, we don't do that. I said, oh, but you do that. Like I read all the stuff in your manual. You do that. You are the public access station, and I am the public, and I need access. That means you have to help me. And they said, what? I said, well, I understand that you assign me a producer, and then I and the producer put together the show. Like that's public access, and you provide all this access to the public.
Wow.
So I am the public, and I'm here to access. I think that was really difficult for them. I
Yeah.
You're either going to have this kid, like, how do you shut that kid up, or how do you make that person go away? And I was not willing to do either of those things. I felt like I knew what the whole point was, and that I knew there were little, rules. And so I had come to work inside the rules. I mean, they
Wow.
said what the rules were.
Yeah.
So they assigned me a producer. We did a little show. And
Ah.
and it was the beginning of this process of how to take a no and work inside the no for a yes.
Mm.
Um, because in the end, I was a kid, they were the big old TV station, and I had no power in the
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
except for my words and except for um, my deep desire to convince them, which I did. I said, I am here to tell stories. I am here to reflect the people that you might not be talking to yet. And I feel like I can do that because I am one of them. And
Wow.
I think that there was a way to be able to talk to people who were much grander, bigger, had more power than me, in being able to see me who I was. And I'm not saying they saw who I was. I'm just saying that the ability to actually walk into a no for me meant that I needed to find a reason for them to say yes. And
Mm.
so that in that particular instance, it happened to be that. But it was a real lesson in the years that would come, because that was, as every creative will tell you, uh, like there are a whole bunch of no's, and once in a while there'll be a yes.
Yep.
We
Yep.
we are to the no. And I think a no is sometimes a maybe.
Mm. Hmm.
How do we find the thing that works that makes it a yes? So in the end, and there were really some hard days of no's. I remember a boss once saying to me, um, why would I hire you? Who would watch you? I mean, it's hard to miss. I'm brown. So I knew what he was talking about. I
Yeah.
understood that he was saying you are not reflective. And I said, "Oh, but I'm a really good I will work hard. I'm a good storyteller, and I will learn to be better, and I want to do better." And it wasn't that particular no was a no. It was not decisive. And it became for me a way to be able to understand, what did I need to do to make myself better? How could I learn more? And how could I, in the next situation, if I had another no like that, which would always inevitably come, what could I say that I could turn that into a yes? So that became sort of a little bit of a theme in this, in one sense. I ultimately ended up actually starting behind the camera, and across the board. Like I as everybody will tell you, I got people's coffees, and then there was a woman named Joanne Hoover, who was a head writer. And for some reason, she thought, I guess I did a really good job on the coffee, and asking every time I saw her, I had a question for her about how to write better. And so she began to teach me how
Mm.
to do that. And again, I'm just a kid.
Wow.
But she took she saw that I cared and I really wanted to know how to do this. And so she gave me that. And I think that was also telling, that I have to be able to tell people, I care about this, I want to do this, and will you please teach me? And it's really interesting when we begin to ask for help. It's interesting how many people will actually feel compelled to help us.
Yeah.
So Joanne Hoover taught me how to write, and then she said, now you have to go to do sports, which, to be completely honest, I knew nothing about. I could write something, and I learned from the sports guys about how to write like good sports copy, and I just thought, well, this is great because I'll learn something about sports that I did. particularly interested, I must say. But whatever. It was storytelling. And what I learned about sports is that actually it was so often about the people in the sports. Like this guy who scored a hat trick was like, he had done that when he was a kid in college. And so it became like it was all storytelling. I understood it to be us understanding people. Um, in the I'm really belaboring the story now. It looks like my entire life.
No.
So I eventually ended up in actually moving from Canada to the US. I convinced this, who I still keep in touch with, by the way, Michael Castangera, to give me a job in Florida. And he did. And so I began producing shows at his station, newscasts, and I worked my way into becoming a, a more expansive journalist. I wanted to know um, all the things that I could. I had some really incredible reporters. One of them is a CNN anchor, and we've often talked about these beginnings that we had together in this little station in Florida. Um, so I began to expand my own ability to understand and to learn more about storytelling in all different ways. And there was investigative journalism and feature reporting. And I wanted to know it all because I wanted to be able to be a jack of all trades in a sense, but more it was about how do I tell each one of these stories differently. I eventually ended up in a much, much bigger place in Florida, in Orlando, and I became the health producer for the main anchor, and I ran the health unit for a little while. Also began to do some investigative work, and the investigative reporter there had been there for years and years, amazing, and he allowed me to learn from him. So I got to learn from people who were around. Eventually, myself then became an anchor and a reporter. And I eventually ended up in an investigative unit where I got to do the investigative stories. I was in St. Louis, and this is a very, St. Louis is very much a black and white city, has a deep, deep history of a lot of social justice ills and ways to be able to hear people and their and the stories they've come to tell. So I was in the investigative unit. We were doing really 5 investigative stories a week. So that's a lot of that we were turning a lot of stuff all the time. It was called the Fox Files, and eventually, I ran an investigative unit. I became a chief investigative correspondent along the way. I had worked at the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S.-Mexico border changed my life. I was just having this conversation with a young student from USC yesterday about how important it was for me to be at the border. People who have nothing, absolutely not one penny to their name, were my teachers and people who had everything, for whom money was no object, status was no object. Or the other, in one 10-mile radius, I encountered both of those people. And the border, I always say to people that the border is a really specific story all on its own. And if you don't understand the culture of the border, it's weaponized so often, but there are real people who live and breathe and love and have a deep cultural institution at the border. And I learned to tell those stories. They were among the most traumatic stories I had ever told. We were the first people to tell the stories of children crossing the border on their own, dying in the river, dying by the hands of coyotes, dying or being killed by people who were using them, leaving them stranded, finding themselves in these places where they didn't really even know anybody and relied on um, the kindness of strangers. I got to tell those stories to those children who had encountered so much to get to the U.S.-Mexico border. They had been hidden in the back trunks of cars. They were raped. And so by the time these were highly traumatized children, I remember the story of Nelson. Nelson and his brother uh, escaped their country because the cartels were trying to recruit them. So their mother made a decision to let them go. Nelson and his brother decided that they would, if something happened, they rode the trains. There's an iconic story that is really true. So many migrants take the trains across Mexico to get on their journey to the border. So they rode the top of the train, and the Zetas, who are the most horrific cartel, they do things like kidnapping migrants, boiling their babies in acid, putting migrants in cages with tigers. I mean, that cartel was incredibly horrific. And so the Zetas got on the train with Nelson and his brother, and they had made a pact with each other, Nelson and his brother, that if one of them was taken by the Zetas, the other one would keep going, to get to the US-Mexico border to escape. And Nelson's brother was taken, and Nelson made it to the border. And that is where I met Nelson. I had made a relationship. I created a relationship with a pro bono lawyer who allowed me the privilege of talking to these really traumatized children, and we got to tell stories. And at that time, nobody had actually been able to hear the voices of these children in their own words. So it was really an important time. So those, drugs, guns, cartels, human trafficking, sex trafficking, money trafficking, all happen on the border every day, all the time.
Right.
And it was a matter of, finding humanity in this chaoticness of the border, the criminality of the border sometimes, and a lot of really amazing things happen on the border. There's community on the border. There is joy between people on the border. The last story I'll tell about I would say that I tell this story even now after all my time leaving the border, because it is the one story that capsulizes for me when I am maybe loath to feel a little sorry for myself when things are not going my way a little bit. I always remember this 15-year-old girl on the US-Mexico border. I mean, it's the tropical, very, very hot kind of.
Yes. Yeah.
But that one year there was an ice storm, and people don't know what to do with an ice storm in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas, because it's 112 all the time, or in the 70s, 80s in the winter. So this particular ice storm really plummeted the temperatures to like 30 degrees. And I had known the area well enough to know that there are colonias, these little settlements, if you will, on the periphery of town, where there was nothing. There was no infrastructure, there was no heat, there was no water. Like, people would just set up this one little, a broken down trailer with a thin sheet of a curtain, and that's that's what they had. So I said to my friend and DP Arturo, let's go find people in the colonias. How are they going to get through this night?
Wow.
So we went, and we came upon a bonfire and 5 children around the bonfire. And none of them, the temperatures were dropping this middle of the afternoon. None of them had anything to get through the night with. No, I mean, they were wearing T-shirts. So Arturo and I went to next door, got some mitts and things, and then we came back. And we were able to at least give these children something to get through the night with. I interviewed the 15-year-old who was in charge of all the 5 children were all related to each other. The oldest was a 15-year-old, and so the rest were her brothers and sisters. I asked her, "Where's your mama?" And she said, she's working, which is very typical for a single mother with these children. And I said, Amiga, if you could just have anything you wanted, like today, somebody could say you could have anything you wanted, and there were no limits. What would you want? And she looked at me, and there was some silence. And then she said to me, just enough. I want just enough. And to me, that was, it stays with me. As I tell the story, I feel it because after all this time, a kid who has nothing, who is actually pregnant, and oftentimes in the colonias, there's so much rape and sex trafficking that I knew that I saw it in her eyes. There was such depth of sadness in her eyes that I knew that was not a voluntary situation for her, that she had probably been raped or something had happened to her. And all in that moment, when somebody gave her the chance to have anything that she wanted just enough. And it stayed with me all these years because I feel like it's so easy to forget our privilege and the place where we come. We visit people in places where they are not always, don't always have privilege, don't always have power, but we as storytellers do have some privilege and power, and it made me always think to remember that I have that going in, and that's something that is important for me to always remember in my storytelling.
Wow. There. When I say that you just exemplify exactly what I hope, storytellers strive for, because that is, I can't imagine. First of all, I can't imagine even going out there. And this will also lead me into this next question, because you are one of the most fearless people I think I have ever met in my entire life.
You're,
Truly,
you're,
once I mean it. And the producers, that we have worked along with, we had these side conversations about you, and just saying, Farrah just has this way, and your heart is so big. And so I just thank you for taking care of those children, and that got me there. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing all of that. That is beautiful. So, with that being said, given your extensive experience as an investigative journalist, you have also gone into conflict zones. So, Somalia, Bosnia, Pakistan. How have these diverse environments shaped your perspective on the challenges of vulnerable populations face, but particularly in your coverage of Syrian refugees crossing into Lebanon?
and I was in Syria itself when the bombs were dropping, so
Oh
I
my
was on both sides of it. It was 2018. It was the most violent year of the war.
goodness.
The president of Syria decided that he was literally going to chemically attack his own people, and so there were bombs dropping every day inside of Syria, people being um, displaced, being killed. So we saw all of that in front of us.
Yeah.
The most vulnerable populations who had no nowhere else to go, who had no other way to be able to save themselves except try to move to safer grounds. They eventually did move. Some of them escaped to the Lebanon part of the border. And I met many of them there. But I also met a lot of them inside country when war was going on. I think what my I had two really formative experiences that I think are cumulative of what is how to really engage populations that are so vulnerable. Um, I had actually taken myself hostage training, so I knew that that was a possibility going into a country that didn't but that jailed journalists and killed journalists. So I knew it was a possibility. And so through the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, I took hostage training, and I knew what that entitled for me, and I knew what that was for so many regular people who were being just snatched from their families and their homes and put in torture chambers. Um, I also knew that, and my experience up to that date had always been centered around so many communities of color, and so many. I'd covered Ferguson, for example, which I would suggest was a war of the streets. It was a
Yes.
really formative. I myself encountered death threats in Ferguson and later in Minnesota, but I knew that people of vulnerable populations are always facing these incredible challenges. And so I had over the years become a more trauma-informed reporter. I think that was really important for me to understand. How do we talk to people? What do we ask people when bombs are falling and your kid is dead? There's different ways to ask questions to allow people who want to tell their story to tell their story. And I don't know that we all know that.
Yeah.
We don't always all appreciate that we are holding these vulnerable people in our hands. And people's natural instinct is to answer us. How we ask the question matters. It absolutely matters. So
Yeah.
I had trauma-informed reporting, and I knew that I was on the ground with all of these people. So they saw me as somebody who was living through the same things with them. And building trust in those moments of complete conflict was really important. They didn't need me to ask, well, how do you feel? Because, well, how do you feel when the bomb is dropping? Like, what do you
Right.
feel about that?
Yeah.
I understood how that felt. But that's also not it's not a revelatory question.
Yeah.
You know, the fear, the things that people care about is helping you understand these things that are going on inside of them, this fear, this inability to go anywhere. Um, so ultimately, I ended up learning a lot from the people in conflict zones about how do you manage to walk into these situations with people with such a traumatized group of people who are seeing conflict firsthand, are seeing people die and be killed, be chemically attacked, and not have a way to go. So they were my great teachers, I feel, in how to actually deal with trauma for myself, how to regulate myself in that moment so that I could be a receptor and somebody who could listen to those stories, because that's really important. Like, it's not about me. Ultimately, it's about the space of being able to create a safe space for people to be able to tell their stories. And I heard horrific stories. I on one near the Baalbek, which is in the Lebanon side of the border, where right now that those areas are exceedingly Israel is bombing those areas, so a lot
Yes.
of people are displaced in those areas and dying. So many of those people are Syrian refugees
Yeah.
that themselves escaped a war that was killing them, and they ended up in Lebanon. And I remember Muhammad told me a chilling story that was difficult to hear, and I guess I would say that it was important for me to hear without being able to have my own regulation around it, because for him it was
Right.
important to tell it. And basically what he said to me, he was a psychologist in Syria. He managed to escape while Syrian soldiers were firing at him. He managed to make it over the hills, make it into Syria. When he got to Syria, he saw all these children who also had escaped, and none of them were talking. They
Mm.
had all stopped talking because they were so traumatized.
Yeah.
So Mohammed began just in the dirt, a little school where they could come to learn and sing the songs of their heritage and be
Mm.
each other. And he could find a way to. He's a psychologist, so he knew that trauma needed a different language.
Mm.
And so when I met him, he said to me, he said, I also had to understand that my own trauma was in kind of mixed in here. And what happened to me was that the forces kidnapped me and they tortured me. Um, and I'm only going to be graphic here for a second so that I think it's important to understand why he felt the need to tell me this part of the story. And he said, they electrocuted my private parts. And for him, it was important that I understand what he had gone through and survived. He had survived this incredible, cruel act of torture. And he wanted me to be able to understand that and know that, to understand also his resilience, and
Yeah.
that he needed, for him being able to be in space with these children required him to regulate himself and also be in understanding with these traumatized children. So Mohammed was really instrumental.
Wow.
Since then, my all of my travels in conflict zones, I met so many mothers and children in during famine and living inside the bounds of terrorism in Somalia and in Kenya. I went to I guess the story of my life. I never did anything else. I always say that maybe I will think that I did one tiny little thing that was okay. And that was that when I went to a refugee camp in Kenya. I went there to find a 3-year-old. And the reason that 3-year-old was in the refugee camp is because her parents had gotten refugee status. So 1% of all people get refugee status. So they had gotten refugee status to come to the US. And the government had said to them, well, your baby is just born. She was days old. So you can't take your baby with you because if because your baby can't pass extreme vetting.
Yeah.
So you have to stay here with your baby in this hellhole, or you have to leave your baby in a refugee camp.
Mm.
So this is the choice that these two parents had. They also had two other children who were very sick, so they needed refugee status to be able to get care for their family. They left Anfa in the camp with some family members who also had refugee status,
Mm.
her grandparents, and they thought, well, okay, because the United States allows you to bring a dependent child to sponsor that dependent child. So when I met them, Anfa was 3 years old. So they had been fighting for 3 years to try to get their baby. And it was the beginning of 2017, there was a Muslim ban. A lot of processes had been shut down for
Mm.
immigration and for legal immigration. And that is why I went to find Anfa. And I must say, Anfa did change me as a human being. She was a really sassy 3-year-old. Um, and my moment that was incredibly revelatory was I had taken for her, I'd recorded her mother on my phone before I left because I wanted to show Anfa that her mother had a message for her. And so as I was showing Anfa this message that that I had recorded on my phone of her mother saying, Anfa, I love you so much, Anfa. Your brothers love you, your father loves you. We all love you so much. And don't worry, Anfa, we will come to get you. And I know that that was a, a mother's attempt at trying to console a child. And when I showed that message to Anfa, 3-year-old Anfa. She looked at the phone, she looked at me, and she looked at the phone,
Mhm.
and then she just bent down and kissed the phone because she thought her mother was in the phone.
Oh,
And like that was for a 3-year-old, that was her mother was in the phone. And then she wouldn't let go of me. Like she wanted to be
yeah,
on my hip, she wanted to be on my leg because she thought, as a 3-year-old, I was going to take her to her mother,
yeah.
thousands of miles away. It changed my life telling Anfa's story. The end of Anfa's story, so we all can breathe a little, is that Anfa Abdullahi, when I got back, we did, there were several things that had to happen in order for Anfa's story to be, for Anfa's application to come to the United States to be considered. And I happened to have the good grace to encounter a grandmother at one of the legislative offices who had picked up the phone and initially had said she would not talk to me. And then I sent her Anfa's picture, and when you see Anfa's picture, then you can understand why Anfa is a really compelling character. And so it was Barbara who essentially stepped into the gap, and between Barbara and I, we worked for 7 months together. And the end of Anfa's story is at 7 months to the day that I met her. Just before she was about to turn 4 years old, Anfa Abdullahi got on a plane in Nairobi, Kenya, flew through Amsterdam and Chicago, and landed for the first time in her almost 4 years um, at Minneapolis airport and in the arms of her parents who were waiting for her for hours at the airport. And it was really interesting because initially when her mother picked her up, Anfa said to her mother, take me to my mama. I've come here to see my mama. You take me to my mama. And I said to her mother, Famo, I can't imagine. Your child doesn't recognize you in that second, like your child doesn't recognize you. And
Yeah.
she said her heart broke for a second, and then she said to Anfa, I am your mama. I am your mama. And I think the cumulative emotional journey of that story really changed me in so many different ways. But essentially, you started with a very simple question about conflict journalism in my
No, this is beautiful.
and so ultimately that ended up for me after the Syrian war. I came back and I did the work that we're doing now.
Oh, my goodness. I have to ask though, and I'm sure listeners will wonder too, how do you process this as a journalist, but as a human being, Farrah? I mean, these are such difficult, hard stories, and you are watching it firsthand. How is that process, going through you? And I mean, Ampa's story has changed you forever, but truly, like, how do you keep going?
I think that's a really important question, not just because I am going to give you an answer, but I think that's an important question for all of us who work in these fields with highly traumatized people. Um, so my mother had a lot of clarity in her life, and she would always say to me, first you are a human being, and then you are my daughter, and then you are a journalist and a documentary filmmaker. And number one matters most, that you are a human being to people. Which means that if you're a human being to people, you feel their pain, you feel their joy, you celebrate with them, and you cry with them, because that's what human beings do when we are affected by other human beings. We react as human beings. And it is absolutely inevitable that we will feel people's pain and we will carry it and we will internalize it. And it's a process, and it's been a process for me to learn that and to understand how I myself need to be able to understand this how do I process my own pain? Because I had a lot of PTSD. I mean, it's war zones, and a lot of
Yeah.
people who cover and who work in war zones will tell you there is PTSD. It's unhealed trauma that we are carrying around, that we have to find a way in order to continue to do this work. You have to manage that PTSD so you're not bleeding it on all the people who have come to tell you their stories. Because if you do that, you are no longer, it's not no longer about the people in the story. It's now becomes about you.
Hmm.
So I learned that I had to, in fact, it was a military general who, after my time in Africa, in war zones, called me and said, a lot of my guys are committing suicide. Suicide is really high in the military. So I want to know, how are you going to manage what you've seen? What are you going to do about it? How are you going to do about it? How am I going to help you do that? Um, and it was a moment of realization that, I think so many of us just feel, I mean, I can, I, I can.
Yeah.
Um, Something changes inside your bloodstream when you hear and feel and incorporate trauma, and it requires us to tend to that, to have self-compassion and to tend to these hurts and wounds that we carry. And I get a lot of counseling, I have to say, and I had extreme amounts of trauma myself. Like personally, I had lost a mother. My mother died in the midst of my seeing all of these horrific situations in my trips to Africa, when terrorists were following me around and I was going to refugee camps, and people were like walking 100 miles with their disabled children and drinking urine to kind of stay alive to get to the next place. Like these, there was so much of all of that and my own personal stuff. And it required me to really uh, find counseling, find a way to be able to deal with that so that I could be a whole person coming to continue to tell these stories, because not telling them was not an option. So
Yeah.
I'm like gonna tell these stories, and so I think it's important that we understand um our own parts of trauma and wounds that we carry, and that we don't bleed them onto the people who actually want to tell us their stories of trauma. And that doesn't mean that we don't relate. Of course we relate. Like, of course we have to step in footstep with people as they tell us these stories, because there are moments that we identify. We know what it feels like to be silenced, or not to be heard. Like there are some themes we all understand, which we can really relate to with people of who have stories of trauma to tell. But it's really important for us not to be able to bleed on them, and to get the help that we need, to have self-compassion, to talk to other people who are like us,
Yes.
who are also doing this work, to be in community with people who are doing this work. And so that we are always doing better practices for ourselves and for other people, because I think the soul, the guiding light is to tell stories so that they can be amplified and heard.
Wow. Yes. Amen to all of that. And truly why this podcast exists and why I'm interviewing both trauma survivors and creatives, because it is that center and it is finding that. So thank you so much for expanding on that. I appreciate that. So with that being said, you then transition fully into this true crime genre that has taken America by storm for so many decades. I mean, this really isn't anything new. But what then drew you to start telling those kinds of stories?
What I think people misunderstand about true crime. So let's think of it this way. True crime is the most popular genre
Yes.
anywhere, everywhere. People are addicted to true crime.
Yeah.
You cannot get enough true crime.
Yeah.
Networks cannot get enough true crime. Um, and what is for me, I learned in my career that true crime was actually instrumentally about one essential thing.
Hmm.
And that was a story of the people for whom crime was happening, who had lost people to true crime. What makes true crime so integral and why we care about it so much is because of the emotion of the stories of the characters who tell us, my person was murdered and this is how it happened. And I tried to go find out. And so the TikTok of how people actually found the agency to go try to figure out what happened to their person. What happened to this person in my neighbor who died, who was like murdered? What happened to like this person that I was listening to on the radio one day, and then somebody came into their home and murdered them? What happened to that person? So I think the idea of personal storytelling in true crime is the glory of true crime, to be honest. It's not the true crime itself, it's how people tell their story of true crime. And when we tell stories of true crime to the people who have lived it and experienced it, and which is what everybody wants to do, right? Like true crime format. Like in every true crime format, what do you need? You need a character. You need characters.
Yep.
And you need those people to be able to walk you through the true crime thing that happened to them.
Yes.
And so ultimately, what I think sometimes we misunderstand is that it's all about characters and people. And so it's storytelling is never any different. It's always about characters. It's always about people. And what we know about people and characters is if you create the space for them to tell you their true crime story, they will tell you more. They will tell you deeper true crime stories.
Yes.
This is what everybody wants. Every true crime format wants, like, tell me what was that like in that 1 second when you saw that those splatters on the wall, like, what did you think? This is what the producers do. This is what we all do in true crime. I'm like speaking to the choir. I know I am. And the way we get people there is to actually build the trust and the space for them to be able to emotionally. I also really believe we call it true crime as a genre. This is what has happened to somebody in their lives. Like they are dealing with, there are so many people I keep in touch with that I've done episodes with, because they all have an anniversary. They'll all have a birthday. They'll all have a memory. And every now and then I'll hear from them. Hey, remember when you came to see me at the cemetery? We went to his grave and then we talked about that. And that was his birthday. It's his birthday today. I mean, these are moments we live through with people because this is not true crime to them. This is true crime to us, but it is actually their real life and that they are dealing with long after we're gone.
Exactly.
The memories stay, the anniversaries come, and I think there's a lot of value in being able to honor people as we keep in touch. I keep in touch with so many of the people who I've done episodes with, and I think, I think there's another reason to do that too, because their stories change over time, and as true crime episodes and true crime stories and true crime shows change, they do, like, there is another space for that person to tell their story of to somebody else, and the journey of their story of where I first met them and then where are now 10 years later, so I think on a human level, it's important for us to see true crime as the genre that I know it is for commercial purposes, and as the human being and the lives that are impacted by it. And to me, that is storytelling, ultimately.
Yeah. And in Pebbles episode, we talked about that moment that we all came together, us three, before she went onto that set. And Farrah really shared this beautiful mantra, if you will, before we went out there. You also gifted us a bracelet. And this bracelet, I know for all of us, symbolized, getting through these difficult moments, because Pebbles is someone, and she so eloquently put it, you know, we often think true crime is just one isolated incident, but hers was years and years and years of being victimized. And so creating that I had never seen that before, Farrah. I mean, I have been in the field for so many years and watching that moment, and you are speaking your truth, listeners. Like, this is really someone who takes that time, allows the people to feel that connection, because when I'm watching you conduct these interviews, you are connecting on such a deeper level. And I think that then formulates into almost this ethical type of storytelling. So, with that being said, what makes ethics an essential aspect of storytelling, especially within this true crime genre?
Let me just take up 1 second and say how brave and courageous I think Pebbles was.
1000%.
Pebbles had escaped a cult.
Yeah,
It wasn't just your really regular old true crime story. This was
exactly.
years of extreme amounts of abuse, of brainwashing,
Hmm.
of uh, belonging to people who had control over every part of your life,
Yes.
who told you you are and not who you understood yourself to be. There was no Pebbles. And
Yeah,
there was only somebody who told Pebbles who she was.
correct.
For her to have yeah, I just want you for a second to imagine what it takes, the amount of bravery and courage it takes to finally realize you have agency,
Mm.
to tell this whole cult that you are not these people. You are a person who does have a little power. And how do you even find that when you've never been taught that?
Yes.
Pebbles was brought to the cult as a kid.
Yeah.
She grew
Yeah.
up in this. She was violated violently for years. Um,
Yes.
and there's really complicated feelings around that. The people who
Absolutely.
violate you are also your saviors, are also your heroes, are also your religious guides. I mean, it's a really incredibly complicated space to be. And I have to say that it was hearing Pebble's story and understanding how absolutely honest she was, how she literally stepped in to these horrific moments to help for our sake. It was really difficult for her to tell this story for
Yes.
our sake, so we, the viewer, could understand what it was like. She had to really encounter um, the trauma of that, and she decided selflessly so she would do that so that we would understand. Um, it's an incredibly altruistic thing to do.
Yeah.
And Pebbles tells her story so that other people can hear that they are in these spaces and they too can leave.
Yes.
There is agency in that, that if she has done it, they too can. And I remember telling Pebbles one time, it's quite possible that you may never know, the person who is on the other end, who's listening and hearing you, you may never know what you said that will help them.
Hmm.
And I think and we have to be able to allow people to have um, empowerment to be able to tell us when they don't feel that we are exploiting them. And Pebbles had to tell us the most painful. I don't know that we actually could have used so much of what she'd been able to tell us
Yes. Correct.
because it was so horrific. And I think they made some decisions in post about how much could viewers hear.
Right.
Hope they decided to do. I have trust and faith that they did a really good job in helping us understand her story through her story and what she felt was important to tell us. I know that everybody who heard her story outside of us, the story producer, the executive producer, the
Mhm.
the head of the company, everybody who heard her story was affected by Pebbles, like they were just not the same after they heard the story, which
Correct.
to us tells us that her story was incredibly powerful. And so so the ethics of being able to sit across um, the way and being able I try to be as close to people as I can get. My really wonderful DPs have understood and are so kind in me being and in really kind of working around me sometimes because I choose to be close. But just I think it's a natural thing for me when I'm hearing somebody, I kind of lean in and I like it's gotta drive them batty. Because head is in what you don't want your head in the shot of somebody. And so they are always so kind to be able to work through that with me. But I think of the person who's telling me that story. The idea that when you're telling the worst thing that has happened to you, you need to have, I know that it doesn't always register for people if you're not thinking about it, but there is some idea about closeness, and the closer we are, they feel, our characters like Pebbles could tell us better, but what my feedback always from survivors has been that when you are close to me, I feel like I could tell the story. It's like you're close to a really good friend, like you at least are getting. So there are spaces, and you know what? Our DPs will work with us on how we can be closer, how we can shoot these so that we can have that intimate. Imagine somebody telling you that they are being violated. And we tell those stories to people who are sitting right next to us. Like that's how we want to be able to tell that story. And so it's important for us to create that however we can and to the extent that we can. It's really important, I think, not to step in when people are telling their stories. I know that as producers, we want them to say this one thing because we hear it in our heads, and I know we want them to say it that way. And let me just say that people don't always say the things we want them to say. And it's okay because and 99.9% of the time, they say it better.
Yeah.
When we create the space for them to be able to say it, when we're not interrupting them, when we're not telling them, can you say it this way, like that way, use that word, when we and it's like, listen, sometimes it's necessary to be able to say, hey, this is the kind of thing I need to be able to tell the story. How do you think we can work together to kind of tell it so we know that that gets through? I think when you are when your character, your person you're interviewing is your collaborator, you treat that person differently. They're not just somebody interviewing. They are your collaborator. They are your partner in crime. They are the person who I always say to every single survivor, we are doing this together. I have many hours of conversation with them way before we ever sit down in front of each other. And I have done that even on true crime episodes when we have very, very little bit of time. If I'm meeting them for the first time, I expect them to reveal all of this information to me that is horrific and awful. And even in true crime, in my opinion, it's a little unrealistic to expect people to share so much with you when when I have not taken the time to call them on the phone and say, hi, my name is Farrah. This is who I am. This is who you're talking to is going to be across the way from you. And this is, and can I just say that I want to be, we're doing this together. You're not alone in this. And I think there is something to be said of being able to create that bounty of trust before we ever get in front of the camera. So ethically, I think that we have a duty, especially with extremely traumatized survivors. And Pebbles was part of a 10-part series of a docuseries, a cult docuseries that actually centered the most traumatized survivors we have ever met.
Yes.
And that becomes even more important to be able to create that bounty of trust and of intimacy so that they are able to tell you these stories. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Oh, it absolutely does. No, and on the flip side of that, because I did share some stuff with Pebbles behind the scenes, and I want to talk about this with you because you are the first field producer that allowed me to talk with the entire crew about what we were going to hear on those next few days on that shoot. And I had heard from the different crew members talking about, I've never had that before. I didn't know someone like yourself could be on set, that you could be there as that support system. But watching you do that and making the crew very much humans to the survivors as well. So making sure that we're introducing the DP, we are introducing, everyone in that room who's going to be there. You gave them agency, but being able to do that was so unique because I haven't seen that on, other sets. And we get in there and okay, everybody, here we go. We've got lighting, da 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 da. We're in it. We're in the thick of it. But you took your time. You explained it. You allowed your crew to know this is not your average true crime stories. You are going to hear the worst of the worst. So just know, by Pebbles hearing that happened on the back end, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that." And it speaks to the person that you are. And that is my hope. This is the whole reason I'm doing this podcast because I want the industry to understand it is not easy to listen to this. This is not, we're not listening to talking about, I don't know, the Super Bowl, and hearing all these things. So just know that that is one thing that I hope more producers and showrunners, directors, everyone, they start doing because you also are humanizing the people who are helping create this story and crafting this narrative, but giving them that space to say, it's going to be a lot. And thankfully, like I said, I had different crew come to me and share those difficult things that they did hear, and letting them know that I am here to be there and equally as trauma informed and talking through that. So I just want to thank you again for being that beacon of hope that we are moving in the right direction as we continue telling these traumatic stories of people. So on the flip of that, how do you see true crime evolving in Hollywood? And again, how do we prep everyone to be able to hear these things? And hopefully this is something that, can be implemented for years to come.
Um, we do not interview survivors in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's not only me.
Yeah.
It's not only me in the room. Um, I am really, really lucky to work with crews. And I think it's important. So often crews don't feel like they feel like part of the furniture. They
Yeah.
are
Yes.
not the furniture. They are the main show.
Yeah.
I think so often it's really important to me that the survivor know that we as a crew of people are all there to
Mhm.
support that survivor, and we are all there to listen and hear her story, and we are all there in it with her
Yeah.
or him. And it's really important, so there's a couple of pieces of this, if I may. Hearing those kinds of stories, like Pebbles, doesn't just have an effect on me or you.
Mhm.
It has an effect on the DP, on the audio person, on the second AD, on the person who's doing crafty. I
Yep.
mean,
Everyone.
every single person is affected by what we're hearing.
Yes.
And as producers, we have to be able to create the space, just as we do for the survivor, for the crew to prepare them. And these are like, listen, these are not wimpy people. They have
Yeah.
done a lot of true crime. They have been through a lot of things. They have heard and seen and worked on a lot of shows. And something like this cult docuseries really throws you for a loop because you are hearing things in such vivid and extremity that you have to be able to create spaces for people to be able to deal with that, to create open conversation so that we can all talk to each other. And so often after that show, the crew and I would talk to each other. We would process with each other, because you have to be able to create that space so that we could actually share with each other instead of carrying it around. What we know is unless grief and loss have a way to get through you and out of you, you continue to carry it.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always know that we are carrying grief and loss and these horrific things, even like secondary trauma. You don't always know that until you process people. So it was important for me, to create an expectation for the crew that they are not just there to listen to the story. I said to every one of them, you have all of the permission in the world to create your own relationship with the survivor. Like, shake her hand, tell her who you are, say your name, have a relationship. It's so often crews tell me that they are not allowed to do that. On other sets, they're not allowed to talk to the survivor. I think that's a missed opportunity, both for the survivor and for the crew. The crew is what we learned, and I think you can certainly, if you have a perspective about this, but I think if Pebbles, for example, felt closer to us as a crew, she wasn't just looking into a camera of somebody. She knew Nathan was behind the camera.
Yep.
And she knew him because he had introduced himself. He was a dad. And, so those little pieces of information, when it was really hard to tell, he's a guy. So it was really hard to tell that really, really, really hard stuff. She knew he's a dad. He has a wife. He has children, and you're not just saying it to some guy behind a camera. So it was really important for me to ensure that the crew felt that they had permission to create their own relationships, for us to create space, for us to deal with the things that we would hear, and that requires open communication. I will also just say, this particular production company made it absolutely possible not only for you to be on set, but actually I think they are unique in the sense that they really cared about the survivors here.
They did.
And to this day, I'm in touch with the head of the production, the person who is in charge of post. James McNabb is an absolutely incredible human being, and our boss, but also really important that he understands this idea of what we as creatives need, how we have to show up in the field for survivors, and he shows up in the field that way. And when he came to visit my sets, he was entirely setting the stage for how we do this work with survivors. So I feel lucky that we actually, because we don't always get that, to be completely honest with you.
1000%.
And I do think this is a model in some ways of how we can actually tell these kinds of stories in this way through the support we had. And I worked with a co-supervising field who also had a lot of experience, and he was a guy, but he also got it. Like, he understood so many of these survivors. He and I did some different kinds of survivor stories.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to actually hire people who have had some experience with trauma-informed stuff. And if not, then to at least give them the tools to get. Nobody ever paid for me to go do trauma-informed reporting and interviewing. I saw it as my obligation, and as a creative, I see it as my responsibility to know how to do this. So I think that it's important for me to always know how continue these skills, and people teach me all the time how to interview them better. I don't see these as interviews. I see these as conversations. And so I think it helps for people to actually come to these conversations in the ways that are that feel connective. Connection is really important here. How I mean, true crime is not going anywhere.
Yeah, no.
We're going to get more true crime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be everywhere.
Hmm.
I also know that in my sense, the networks are they're finding different ways to find talent. There
Yeah.
used to be a time when um, there was a whole chain of how we would find talent.
Hmm.
I think there is a move to find talent on social media. The person
Yeah.
who had, a friend of mine who's an EP reminded me that there was this woman who did like a 50-part series on TikTok who got a Lifetime show.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, that's where the industry is finding so much talent. And I think the old way of being able to recognize talent and reach out to talent. You and I have done our fair share of cold calling. And I think that's never really gonna go like no some robot AI
Yeah. Yeah.
is not gonna get on a phone and go
Right.
get a person for us. Although I
Exactly.
know that AI is becoming intuitive and that's a whole different conversation. But I think that the humanity of who we are still exists and will always exist in this space, no matter how all the other pieces change around us, because Hollywood is not going to give up true crime. It's
Yeah.
much too profitable. Um, it's much too popular. People want to know. And I hope that we as creatives are producing true crime in these just small little ways of doing things better
Yeah.
can actually make our true crime work much more emergent and beautiful and emotional and actually serve the purpose for which it is designed. I mean, yes, I know people really care about the TikToks of things and really want to know how things end and who murdered whom and what happened. Yes, it's a absolute part of the format. And what's also absolutely part of the format is that the better our interviewees are, our characters are, the better the show is going to be. And if we see it that
Yes.
way,
Hmm.
if we see ethical storytelling, if we see the ability to step into spaces with our characters and make them even more, give them the space to be even better and more emotional and more connective, that makes our episode much better.
Amen. Yeah. And I just want to echo you when I say that, yes, this production company, I've never felt more heard throughout that process. And you were a pivotal point of that and being able to come to you and say, okay, I think we need to, talk to them about this. And they really took it to heart. And I have never had such difficult but vulnerable conversations with them to say, hey, we really do owe it to them to do X, Y, and Z. And so I just want to echo that as well. But like I said, you were a pivotal part of that process, and keep going. Keep doing that wherever
All
you go.
together,
Please, please, please.
thank you. We are all in it together, really. Us as creatives make really essentially a bond with each other that we care about these stories so much, and we will essentially when we are in spaces together, we are human beings to each other, and we,
Yes.
if we have a tiny little bit of privilege more than somebody else, then it's our responsibility to use that privilege to make the whole thing better, to make all of us better, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, I have one last question before we move into getting to know Farrah outside of amazing Farrah, like in her journalism. But what guidance would you offer to someone who wants to pursue a career in true crime, but also being out in the field?
Uh, People on our sets and my sets always ask me, how do I get into this thing?
Yeah.
And I say to them, you are on this set. You are in this thing.
Yeah.
If you're if you're a PA, you are on
Mhm.
the set. That
Mhm.
means you're part of the process.
Yeah.
That means that you can learn from the person on in that process. And I think it's important to be able to say that you want to do certain things.
Yeah.
Always on my sets, if people are interested, I want them to be able to experience that which they want to do firsthand. So
Yeah.
I allow them to direct one scene, or we create spaces. Let me rephrase that. I create spaces for them to direct a scene, or to, ask all my crews know that once we finish, like, getting the most of the interview, everybody has a chance to ask a question,
Yeah.
because we have built a relationship with our person. So our person now knows us and is willing to actually accept a question from us. So we
Yeah.
all get to ask a question. That's doing something. That's
Yeah.
being in the field. That's being responsive to the work. Um, and I think as producers, and I'm also an executive producer and co-op in other spaces. So I think it's important for us to be able to identify people who want to do this and create spaces for them to do it. And it's people need to actually step into that space once we create that for them. How do people get in? I think you have to you have to want to be in this space. There are a lot of ways to be able to reach some of us.
Yeah.
I mean, we're everywhere. Doesn't it feel like we're everywhere?
Yeah. We are everywhere.
Let me just say it this way. I always feel I don't know everything. I am a lifelong learner. That means every single day I'm learning more.
Yeah.
And the way that I continue to exist and want to exist in more spaces is to ask questions and to find the people who will be receptive to my asking, who will want to give me some guidance. Because I think in essence, it's really difficult to answer, like, here's how you should there. It's not this one sort of, here, add a little water, mix the batter,
Right.
and then let's bake it.
Right.
And there's so many different ways of coming to the space, and all of them are valid. And if you don't do this thing and you're a lawyer, and you want to do this, that is a really amazing thing, because there's such the way that you might use your experience in a different field in the space is really valuable.
Mm.
So I really feel that the one of the ways that I try to help myself is to actually take a lot of webinars. I'm always taking those things so that I understand. I took directing courses from a director who was offering webinars so that I could be a better director. I took producing courses from a reality show executive producer so I could produce better. So listen, there are lots of ways for us to be able to help ourselves so that we can come to this space and ask and reach out to somebody and say, what guidance can you give me? I've now done this, this, and this, and I want to do this. What do you think I can do? Or how can I do this? My answer most often is like, let's learn more, because when we are in spaces at webinars, we get to make contacts with people. We get to
Right.
network with people, show up in those spaces so that we actually get face-to-face time. I think it's really hard to just call like an EP and say,
Yeah.
tell me what to do. It's really difficult to do that because it's so individual. And I have learned that when we come to spaces more fortified, when we keep learning, people appreciate that of us,
Mm.
want to actually help us along our journey because we are doing the work. We have done the work to keep learning. So the simple answer is, like, I literally, even on the road when I'm on a plane, I'll like take a webinar because
Yeah.
of something that teaches me something. I do this in all different ways. Like, there is a organization called Belonging Without Othering that I always will always jump on their webinar because they have such important information about how to actually talk to people in spaces without othering people. So I literally feel like I can't get enough information to do this job. So that's one space to be able to actually meet people, right?
That's incredible. Thank you. That's so valuable too. So love that answer. All right, Miss Farah, we're gonna shift a little bit. So I would love to know what's the most interesting thing you have read, watched, or listened to recently?
I went to see a documentary called Where the Olive Trees Weep.
Mm,
Um, and I, um, well, it broke me, and I'm still broken.
mm,
I recently went on a personal quest to Israel-Palestine uh,
mm.
in July, and I
Wow.
went as a storyteller, but I also went for myself.
Yeah.
This past year, I got accepted into a fellowship called New Ground, and New Ground it had 10 professionals who are Muslim and 10 professionals who are Jews come together, and they spend this next year walking through the world with each other. So after October 7th, I signed up to this thing. Um, and it was transformative. And I walked into the world with Jews and Muslims um, in a world that is really cruel, to be able to understand it, to be able to have different ways. I needed a toolbox to better hear, listen, and talk to people, and find connection with people and understand unhealed trauma in such intricate ways. And a Newground, actually, there's a documentary. CBS did a documentary on Newgrounds. If you are curious about Newground, actually reach out to me and also like watch this documentary, because I think
Oh,
that they're transformative in these spaces and how they are creating bridges and bridge building between people who are very, very different than each other. All of
yeah.
us are professionals. We all have professional lives. Some of us are filmmakers. Some of us were professors. Some of us were writers, um, doctors, like they come from every field. So that was transformative. It ultimately, I now actually partner on things with my Jewish cohort, who has become my really, really good
Wow.
friend, and my Palestinian cohort, who has become my really, really good friend. And we three do things together
Wow.
professionally. Um, and it was the genesis of my wanting deeply to go to Israel-Palestine, to understand it for myself, to see it for myself, and to I went to see Ta-Nehisi Coates yesterday talk about his new book, A Message, because it feels very revelatory for me and it mirrors my experience in Israel-Palestine. I got to meet some incredible human beings. I stayed with my Palestinian friend's family, so I got to see the
Wow.
world through how she and her family move in this space. And I went with Israelis who took me to villages where they are being ethnically cleansed right now. So
Okay.
it was formative in so many ways. And ultimately, this documentary called Where the Olive Trees Weep, I think should be essential viewing for anybody who's a creative, but also anybody so on several different ways. The content is really hard to
Yeah.
watch and really necessary to watch. And also, as a filmmaker, it was an incredible feat of cinematic storytelling.
Mm,
It was incredibly beautiful. The brutality, the lens of brutality was cinematically shown so beautifully.
mm,
And I think I think it creates a lot of complicated feelings. I saw this with Jews and I saw it with Muslims and Palestinians. And I really have some of my best friends are Jews. And I really appreciate being in spaces to be able to talk about these things. And some of my best friends are Muslims and Palestinians. I really appreciate being able to talk through those things with them in safe spaces. And I have friends from across the board who are in different ways, in different places, different things, and different religious and secular communities. So I feel like it's important for me to be in a lot of these different kinds of communities as a storyteller, so I understand it differently from my friends who are Jews, my friends who are Palestinians and Christians and Muslims and secular people and atheists and non-atheists. So as a storyteller, that's empowering. And I think it's important for me to keep pushing the boundary of what I'm willing to watch.
Yes.
Things that are uncomfortable. We grow outside the boundaries of uncomfortableness. And so it's important to watch things that are not comfortable for me. So I watch a lot of docs, and I listen to a lot of things that I hope essentially help me become a more fuller human, that I can listen and bring that work, that that expansive ability to my work as a storyteller. So I'd say Where the Olive Trees Weep is extremely powerful. Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message is really powerful. Also, I went to listen to this author who essentially she compiled this book because she's a Christian woman who lives in Bethlehem. But she traveled the world to try to find people who with whom she could see a story of how they live in the world despite the things they have been through. And she said something really that stuck with me and was really fascinating. And she said, so she found people who've been through war, people who've been through hard things. She found people here in the US and around the world. She's an American woman. She moved to Bethlehem to kind of tell more stories. She essentially said that what we so often forget is that art and culture and music and writing are such northern stars for people. They tell their stories through art, through their music, through their writing. She talked about a young Iraqi guy she met who was playing the banjo, and he was singing this song, and he said, I never got to meet my grandfather, but when my grandfather was displaced, this is the song he sang. Was that song that created his memory of who he was. It gave him his identity. It gave him his way to see himself as an Iraqi in the world, and it helped him understand the world in which he lived. And I thought that was really interesting because, as creatives in our world, we often forget how important it is to ask people their favorite song, their favorite book, their favorite movie, because all of those things give them some pathway into a world outside the trauma, outside. They understand their world sometimes through all of this. And the way she tells stories are so compelling that I think it gives me as a creative a way to be able to see people and their stories as we're telling them. So those are just a few things that I
Love it.
the last.
Beautiful. Thank you for everything that you're doing too. And I can't imagine being in the thick of that as well. And it is so important to understand both sides. So truly thank you so much for sharing that and providing such context to such a crucial issue going on right now in our world. So thank you again, Farrah. So, one of the things that I love to do on this podcast is also shout out small businesses, local. So, what can you shout out in Los Angeles, whether it be a restaurant, bookstore, whatever you would like?
Last night, some friends took me to Annapurna. It's an
Oh,
Indian restaurant in Los Angeles, in Culver City. I gotta tell you, I've eaten at a lot of really good Indian restaurants. Annapurna is just a little family-owned place.
mm,
It absolutely, I think I feel I need to go back there today for chai. It's not going to be possible, but they make the best chai that you have ever had. I'm just saying.
ooh,
My friends Zach and Devki and Andrea and Sumaya and Ruba and I all went to Annapurna. It was like we all from different places all had this incredible experience at Annapurna. I also will just say that I recently, there was a dance troupe from
mm.
Palestine who came, and my friend took me. So I learned how to, I'm not saying that I learned it well. I'm just saying that went to it's called Al Fanoon, Friends of Al Fanoon, who are actually like a little local dance troupe touring the US right now, who are teaching people how to dance the dabka, which is a
Wow.
Palestinian dance. I also very much am in spaces with a lot of my Black friends, and I love there's and I can't remember what it's. I'll have to remember it and maybe get back to you later about this. But there's a woman who really profiles a lot of Black-owned businesses, which I
Mm.
love. They're
Yeah.
just regular people who are just started their little business and are making it, and it's so wonderful. When I realized there is an entire world of small businesses that are down the street from us, that are across the way from us, that we sometimes don't, that we walk by and we never stop. So I feel like every time I'm in a community where there are small businesses, I actually just walk in, just say hello. And here is the benefit of that. I was in Minnesota here about a week ago, actually last Sunday. I was there for an award ceremony, and I on that the day before I went to museum in Minneapolis, and then I walked up, somebody at the museum said, "Hey, like you should go to this little like kind of bookstore, art place. It's like all in one thing, and it's about a half mile away." So I went there, and this woman opens the door it looked like a little house, and it was 3 hours of my life that were absolutely magnificent. She collects she collects things of artists from around the world, from
Mm.
impoverished communities all around the world. They
Wow.
make that their thing, and she sells them at this little store that
Oh,
she
wow.
opened like 35 years ago in Minneapolis.
Wow.
And she creates spaces like every Tuesday. They have tea together. So anybody who is in the community wants to come, they come and they learn about art, and there's textile art and fabric art and art on, mural art and sculpture art. Like it was just and it was an incredible connection to make, to sit with somebody who for whom this is so important, has spent their life in wanting to be in this spaces, and make a new friend and make a new connection. So that's the benefit of being able to walk
Mm.
into one, mom and pop's little small owned businesses. And thank you for actually highlighting those, because they all need us. We are all
Yeah,
community, and community needs community.
absolutely. Oh, I love that. Do you remember the name?
So the woman's name is Anju Kataria, and her business is called Khazana, Khazana. Khazana means treasure.
Perfect.
So
And it was
it's
Minneapolis?
it's in Minneapolis. So if you look up Khazana and you look up this woman, like she's kind of a legend. I didn't realize, but anyway, like if you live in Minneapolis, if you're within the sound of my voice right now, you should absolutely go to Khazana for a few minutes of your time.
Okay, last but not least, who are some of your heroes and how have they inspired you?
Um, Fannie Lou Hamer is my hero. Fannie Lou Hamer is a legend in the world of social justice. Um, and
Mm.
Toni Morrison is my hero. Toni Morrison taught us that we must be writers in times of crises. We must tell the story, and the story must be told. So Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou. Oh my God, I have so many. I probably could like sit here for the next hour telling you about heroes. I will tell you this. Um, these are not the people that you will read in the history books,
Yeah,
but every one of them is a hero to me. All my survivors are my heroes.
yeah.
What they have taught me, how they have affected their own. I talked to one of the survivors. I did one of these cult episodes with a few days ago, and we were talking about how I am constantly inspired by her, because her she's she's had to build a whole new world outside of this cult
Yeah.
that she never knew about. And she essentially, it's like walking into a new country. You
Yeah.
don't know the language, you don't know where to go, you don't know how to get there, and you have to make it.
Yeah.
And she continually inspires me because she knows so much. She like wrecks my brain, and my brain is broken how she knows so much stuff. She's always teaching me. And I think the ability to do that is rather heroic, to operate in this world, to have dreams for yourself, to have a vision for yourself, to know that despite the obstacles, that your space in the world is open for you. It belongs to you, that you have a right to go claim it and do it and find it.
Yeah.
Is to me, so all my survivors are heroes, but I have a long list. And if you really care, then get a hold of me and we'll have a whole conversation.
That's incredible. Well, Farrah, I can't thank you enough for doing this. And like I said, sharing so many beautiful stories and really creating a new landscape for storytelling. And like I said, this is a mission that I have, that, we need to have more ethics in our storytelling, and you exemplify all of that. So thank you for everything that you're doing and for the kindness in your heart. Truly, thank you so much again.
I mean, was an incredible pleasure and a privilege, and I'm just so grateful to be able to talk to you and to your listeners. Thank you so much for having me.
Be sure to join me next week when I sit down with Rita Isbell, the sister of Errol Lindsay, one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. Rita's emotional impact statement in the courtroom became a viral sensation in the 90s, but for years, the media has reduced her to that moment, failing to recognize the depth of her story beyond the headlines. Rita has also spoken out about how she was depicted in Ryan Murphy's award-winning series Dahmer, and how re-traumatizing that was for her. It is my pleasure and honor to have my listeners learn more about Rita, including her journey and wisdom she's gained along the way. It's an incredible conversation you won't want to miss. This is True Crime in Hollywood, a personal tale. Thank you for listening, and as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.